Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Earlier in the day, I was thinking that maybe I would play a tape tonight of Lumpur Pasano rather than giving a talk, because I was feeling like I have run out of things to say. But then I was thinking about it up at my kuti, and also came to mind watching the deer in the forest. Kind of brought up a few thoughts to maybe share, because as most of you know, that we have many deer here at Abhayagiri, and this is their big time of year in terms of giving birth, and lots of little baby deer running around, and it just seems like this year there's this huge proliferation. I don't think I've seen quite so many. And they're, as many people have noticed, they're quite tame here these days after 20 years of living with peaceful monastics. They pretty much trip over them everywhere you go. But and I, walking up and down and from my kuti and in the forest, I see them, and I have a real sense of kindness and appreciation for them, and the little fawns that are kind of running along, very cute, of course, and have a generally benign presence. And then when I get up to my kuti and they're underneath my deck, all of a sudden the perception changes because they like to lie under there in the afternoon particularly, and when they do that, they leave their fleas and their ticks. And then I start to experience itchy legs, and when I'm meditating in my kuti, and picking off fleas and things like that. And then I see them down here, kind of like this afternoon, cruising through, casually eating our plants in the courtyard. And all of a sudden I have a different perception than from the cute little animals in the forest. They become a different creature. And it's funny because, like, when I go up to my cabin and they're hanging out there underneath the deck, and I walk past, or maybe here in the courtyard, and I clap my hands loud to get them to move away, and they kind of jump up and go about 5 feet and then just look. Because they know I'm not going to really do anything other than make some noise and wave my hands. They've kind of gotten used to that idea. And then, I'll get up closer and clap my hands a little bit more, and they'll kind of move away a little bit further. Sometimes if I startle them enough, they'll run. But as Tanrakita once mentioned and noticed, it's sort of like as they're running away, they're kind of looking and eating something and looking at me, and then if I'm not looking very closely or hanging out, they'll just kind of work their way around the cabin and come right back and sit back underneath within minutes even. And so it's kind of this ongoing game that we have, and they're not particularly impressed to do much other than come back. So it's an interesting thing, because I was thinking that, they have this kind of yo-yo effect. It's just like they go out a little ways and then they just keep popping back on this string, and just keep reappearing and occupying their space. thinking that that is actually pretty similar to how our minds work, that we have these things come through our mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions, desires, aversions, and when we're mindful, we have some coping skills to deal with them, but they're very tenacious, and as soon as we let our guard down, or stop paying attention, then just like the deer at my kuti, they just come right back and establish themselves and start to make themselves right at home in the mind all over again. And they're pretty relentless, and we spend a lot of our time kind of falling prey to the different moods and emotions and remembrances, memories of the past, because they just find their way into our heart, and unless we're quite alert and attentive and applying skillful means, then their natural tendency is just to kind of walk around the back, come in through the other entrance. So this is a lot of what the training is all about, is learning to see this process happening, and how to work with that. Past month or two and last week, kind of been inspired to talk about Satipatthana, and talked a lot about mindfulness in relation to the body, which is our core base of mindfulness practice, particularly around the in and out breathing, establishing that as a frame of reference, a centering for our mindfulness practice. Also spent a little bit of time talking about Vedana, mindfulness of feeling, last week, I believe, and I thought, well, maybe this is the time to mention a few words about Chitta Nupassana, contemplation of mind, which is the third Satipatthana. Because this is mind, Chitta, it's where we experience suffering, it's where we experience release from suffering, freedom from suffering. The word mind, that we use the word mind in English in a broad way, and it's referring to what in the Buddhist Pali tradition is divided actually into two basic functions, Chitta and Mano or Manas. I'm not quite sure the Pali, the actual word to use, Mano or Manas in the Pali, but they refer to the two different aspects of mind, the more active intellect that has the ability to analyze and form concepts, ideas, and use them for better or for worse, depending on who's in charge. When the obstructed mind states are in charge, then they'll use this intellect to cause suffering. When wisdom is in charge, it'll use the intellect to help walk the path and move towards freedom. But the aspect of mind that experiences the effects of the actions of the intellect is Chitta, or sometimes translated also as mind, sometimes as heart. But it's that receptive, affective aspect of our experience that feels and senses and receives all the different mind objects that come through, whether they're for better or for worse, whether they lead to suffering or whether they lead to freedom. It's Chitta that understands, experiences those different qualities as they move through the mind. Chitta is what suffers. Chitta is also what can be liberated. Basic, fundamental trait or characteristic of chitta is awareness, this knowing quality of mind that is sensitive. It's kind of its basic nature of awareness is sometimes it's been described as clear and mirror-like, so that whatever objects of mind come through, whether they're positive or negative or obstructive or defiled or liberating, the mind picks up, the heart, the chitta picks up the flavor, the tone, the characteristic of those particular mind objects, and kind of is imbued with the affective quality of those states, so that if lustful or harmful or confused thoughts and emotions arise in the mind, if we allow our attention to move into them and buy into them, if the underlying tendencies are strongly in charge, then that essentially becomes the color of our experience, kind of like a dye being dropped into a pool of water. The whole pool of water takes on that color. The dye and the water are actually not the same thing, but it is dispersed through, the dye is dispersed through the water, so that that's what the experience is of. You drop some red dye in, and one experiences, one sees it as red. The whole mind takes on that tone or that color. So we can use the active aspect of mind, the intellect, the ideas, to help direct our attention, which is also an active aspect of mind, to appropriate objects to help alleviate the obstructive states of mind, to help let them go, let them pass on through appropriate attention, and also to encourage and develop skillful states of mind, skillful recollections, skillful conceptions, if you will, to help change the color, to help clear up the confusion in the mind, and to allow the heart to settle into its more natural state. So the Satipatthana, Chittanupassana, in its basic form within the teaching, if you look at it, you'll see that the very first step in what the whole that whole third frame of reference talks about is just experiencing this mind, getting to know what it's all about without trying to put any judgment on what's in there, at least at first. We just want to know what's in there. So the way that Satipatthana goes is that in examining the mind and being sensitive to the mind, one knows whether there's, say, lust present or whether there is no lust present. One knows whether there is anger present. One knows when there is no anger present. One knows when there is delusion present, and one knows when there's no delusion present. One knows the constricted mind as constricted. One knows the distracted mind as distracted. One knows the exalted mind as exalted. One knows the unexalted mind as unexalted. One knows the surpassed mind as surpassed. One knows the unsurpassed mind as unsurpassed. one knows the concentrated mind is concentrated, one knows the unconcentrated mind is unconcentrated, one knows the liberated mind is liberated, one knows the unliberated mind is unliberated. So it's a very objective evaluation that we first, when we're taking a look at the qualities of chitta, examining that in our experience. And it's just noticing essentially whether these certain qualities are present or whether they're not present, just to get to know what the mind is all about, what we're experiencing, without necessarily moving into action right at the beginning. We have to know what we're dealing with before we start to make adjustments. And the Anapanasati Sutta, which many of you are familiar with, the mindfulness of breathing, closely correlates with the Satipatthana. And the third tetrad, the third section of Anapanasati, starts out with just that as well, where you have the phrase like chittang patisangveti, being sensitive to the mind, experiencing the mind. One breathes in and one breathes out, and this is the training. So that's the very first step in that section. It's just understanding, being sensitive to, really getting to know those various qualities. What's the mind like? Ajahn Chah used to recommend that as a good starting place for any period of meditation, is just to sit back and say, okay, what's the quality of the heart right now? What's its basic flavor? What's its basic color? Being sensitive to that. Anapanasati, being a practical application of Satipatthana, then takes it further, though, other than just knowing the qualities. Then it talks about how to develop skillful qualities in the heart, in the mind, that can lead to a settling, a calming, and a distilling, a settling out, so that one experiences more peace of mind and clarity that serves as a basis for deeper understanding. And the second step of that third section talks about gladdening the mind. Abhipamodayang chittang, gladdening the mind. He breathes in, he breathes out. This is the training. Referring to a quality called pamoja, which can be called gladness or easefulness, ease of mind. So that at first we get to know the qualities that are in the mind and exactly what's there, and then we work towards gladdening the mind, just to bring it some refreshment, getting it, pulling it up out from the doldrums, helping to disentangle from negative states of mind that cause us dukkha, that cause the heart to contract and to become very narrow and fixed and around an unpleasant state of mind that often gets caught in proliferative conceptualization, adding layer and layer of more suffering onto that. We all know that. You get really stuck on something, some bad memory, some very recalcitrant mind state, an opinion about the way things should be and the fact that you can't have them the way you want them to be. There's people that are obstructing you. We can sort of latch onto that and make a long and drawn out story. And essentially that, by putting so much attention on that in an unskillful way, in a way that isn't using wisdom, we just keep creating this very unpleasant state of mind that chitta has to experience. This is dukkha. This is the suffering of the mind that is in a reactive state and has lost its clarity, lost its fundamental base of clarity and peace. We've started to attend to and believe in the objects that are floating through it enough to cause that contraction, narrow state of mind. So after we've noticed that, and released it, or started to partially release it. And this is where the Anapanasati is so useful. As you know from the Anapanasati Sutta, all through all 16 steps, including these, when we're looking at the heart, looking at the mind, we're still doing it, breathing in and breathing out. And this is the strength of this actual practice of mindfulness of the body through the constant attention of breathing. Even when examining these afflictive mind states, we've always got the breathing as our backdrop to handle the energies as they come into our awareness, so that we have the strength and the capacity and a tool to help deal with the unpleasantness of some of these negative mind states that we can find ourselves in. So we're experiencing some aversion or strong sensual desire, craving, something comes through the mind that disturbs its natural peace. And if we're maintaining that in and out breathing, then as we examine them, as we explore them, there's an avenue for release, because it's that in and out breathing, that gentle rhythm, quality, and attention to the body that can pick up where the contraction happens, the energy contraction and obstruction in the body with these afflictive mind states. The breathing can just receive them and help them drain off, even as we are looking at them and experiencing them and allowing them into our awareness. So we've got this very useful tool to anchor ourselves and to drain off the difficulties as we examine them. And then as we start to get a little bit of release, a little bit of perspective on the particularly difficult mind habit, we can also start to, as we can set down the energy, at least temporarily with that, we can also start to turn our attention in a wise way instead of attending unwisely to these memories and thoughts and stories. We can start attending wisely to some more skillful states of mind and use the thinking process, the vitakka vichara, applied and sustained thought to help use those as a tool to steer our attention into an appropriate place, a wise place, to help gladden the mind, help establish that sense of ease and pamodja that we all seek. The mind has this natural inclination, this wish to be peaceful and happy. So there's a lot of tools that we can use to help gladden the mind. Reflections, turning our attention to things like faith in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, the triple gem, refuge in the triple gem. Reflections of gratitude for the things that have happened to us that we feel appreciative for. Ways people have offered generosity or kindness to us, or ways that we've been generous and kind to others as well. Everybody has that capacity. We all have that. We all do that at times. We are all people who give at times, and to actively recall that is a skillful use of our attention to direct the mind to something that leads to a sense of settling and appreciation and gladness in the heart. So we have to remember to make that active, not just to do generous kinds of things, or not just to have appreciation, but to bring it up in contemplation and remember it. Remember the skill that we've brought into the world for non-harming, following precepts, not going out and shooting those deer, but just letting them live their lives. All of those kinds of ways that we've helped create a sense of safety in the world, just to actively recollect those are ways to help settle the agitation in the mind. One of the primary ways of gladdening the mind that I think most of us find useful is just the practice of the Brahma Viharas, the Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha, loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, and to really making those central part of our daily reflections, of our how we want to steer our mind into these very sublime, spacious, very up to boundless states of mind that create a sense of clarity and stillness, as well as gladness. And it's been a while since I've actually talked much about how I approach reflections on loving kindness. I mentioned it a little bit at First Tuesday in Berkeley, and a couple of people seemed to resonate with it, and I realized I haven't mentioned it. It's a little bit different maybe than the standard approach that is taught, and it's based on some teachings that I received early in my monastic career from some reading of some transcripts of a conversation with a monk in Thailand who had developed this particular style to quite a deep extent. But as most of you know, in the traditional approach to metta bhavana, of development of loving kindness, that one often starts with drawing or picturing an image of somebody who one is feels appreciative of, or like a spiritual mentor, or a parent if you had a good relationship with your parents. Someone who, when you think about them, brings up a sense of kindness, of caring, such that feeling comes up in the mind from somebody who you feel close to, or who you have a sense of joy when you think about them. And then slowly develop it, expanding it to different classes of people. And with the idea of sending out these qualities of kindness, wishing well, using words and phrases, again, the Vitakka Vichara, using skillful words and phrases, like, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, and extending those to the people that we care about and feel are friends. May they be well, may they be content, may they be free from suffering, and onwards through neutral people and people that we have difficulties with, and then gradually through different classes of beings to include all living beings. And with this process of sending out this quality of well-wishing. And over the years of practicing that way, and I've heard this from other people too, sometimes one experiences a sense of dryness, that you're just going through a recitation of words and phrases that sometimes just becomes kind of routine and rote, and it actually doesn't really move the heart very strongly in terms of actually experiencing this feeling of loving kindness. And that sometimes it feels kind of forced, trying to push these thoughts and ideas out into an expanding sphere of awareness, where actually you feel maybe a bit contracted and trying to just say some words and send them out into the universe feels kind of limited and maybe not very genuine. And I've heard that from many other people at times, and certainly have experienced that myself. But this other teaching that I found very useful, and when I do this kind of reflection myself, I find it quite helpful, is again to start with that basic sense of trying to engender that actual experience of kindness and caring in oneself. Sometimes it's, rather than saying words, it's easier to just come up with some sort of image of, say, someone who has been a benefactor in a way. Again, someone who is close, but someone who has clearly helped you and to remember and bring up that feeling of what it actually felt like at the time they were helping you, to remember the incidents or moments when particularly maybe you were having a difficult time or struggling or in some sort of physical or emotional pain, and somebody with enough caring and concern gave you some time, gave you some advice, gave you some help in some way or another, that made you feel appreciated, made you feel welcome, made you feel attended to, made you feel heard, and just the sense of just that sense of gentle warmth and relief that you feel when you bring up that memory of that occasion. And to let that really sink in, let that sink into the heart by bringing up that actual image or memory of that person or that event. And let that distill into just a real strong bodily feeling, and to notice where you feel it in the body. An easefulness or openness in the heart or in the belly or in the head, a relaxation of tension, just that quality of easefulness that comes up in the energetic experience, the experience of the body and the mind. And to dwell with that and let it grow, but not having to worry about sending it out or doing anything other than just knowing it and experiencing it deeply. Sometimes it's useful to come up with after you've really established it well in your mind, in your heart, to come up with a single word that helps to describe the actual bodily feeling, the energetic feeling, not so much the incident or a descriptor of the person or a quality, but the experience, a word that describes the actual experience inside. And it might be something like peace or gentleness, gentle, or warm, or expanded, relieved. Just whatever word speaks to you. It doesn't have to be my words, but just something that comes up as a descriptor. And every time you do that exercise, use that word. Eventually, you can just sit down and fairly quickly, after you've established that association, you can just sit down and then just say that one word, and that actual experience in the body, in the mind, will come back. The body and the mind respond to that kind of cue once it's become a word that's associated with those feelings. And then, rather than feeling the need to send it out and expand it to that feeling, sending it out to other beings, just to sit there with that as your experience, and then allow your awareness itself, your own awareness, to relax and see if the boundaries of the awareness that's usually situated with just one's body, seeing if that can extend out a little bit to be a little bit more spacious around the edges, extending out from the body, the energetic qualities, the awareness, the consciousness, just moving out from the edges a little bit, enough to make space for others to come into that, so that you're still there, you're still occupying your body, your attention is firmly grounded in the breathing, the in and out breathing, as always the basis, enjoying the feeling of kindness, metta, just as it is right there, and slowly inviting people that you care about, people that you feel neutral to, people that you're having difficulties with, anybody, any creature. There's no barrier, but you're still there, you're in the center, and you invite them into that sphere to be there with you in that sphere, that growing, expanding sphere of kindness, of well-wishing, of warmth that is being known every breath, every in-breath, every out-breath, But you never leave that center. You never go out. It's just this quality of ever relaxing, opening, expanding, and allowing others in to share that. So if you practice in that way, or at least when I practice in that way, can develop a real sense of easefulness in the mind. The heart gladdens, opens up. And the breathing is always there. It starts to slow down, modulate, becomes deeper, helping to spread that quality of well-wishing kindness to oneself, to others, throughout the whole body and throughout whatever sense of awareness we have, expanded to include others. But it stays firmly grounded right here, always with the breathing in and the breathing out. And if that's developed, even to a small or a moderate extent, the mind will start to settle quite naturally. One doesn't have to go and try and make the mind concentrated. We've all talked about, we've all heard, the tendency to try and think that we have to develop concentration and then we'll experience happiness in our hearts. But really going with the reverse, establishing that sense of contentment, peacefulness, clarity through these kind of active reflections, and then the mind naturally settles. The mind naturally develops samadhi as it starts to clear out and relax and open and broaden from its narrow, constricted state of mind. So this is developing the heart, developing the chitta through attention to skillful qualities and the relaxing of the unskillful ones, gladdening the mind. And then that third step in the anapanasati of developing concentration, experiencing samadhi, samadhahan cittang, concentrating the mind, breathing in and breathing out. This is the training. And that's so it's a natural response. It's not something you have to do. It's a natural response to that conditioning, that reconditioning that we've done. And then the fourth step of vimochayan cittang, releasing, liberating the mind. This refers to a temporary liberation based on citta vimutti, the release of the heart through this gladdening and distilling and settling, and clarifying that can happen as a result of the gladdening of the mind. Then if the mind becomes very, very still and the hindrances are temporarily suspended, the underlying tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion are at least in abeyance, if not eliminated, then one experiences the sense of freedom, of release. So this is the third Satipatthana, the third frame of reference, and how we develop that always again in conjunction with this breathing in, breathing out as our basis for managing the energy of having to deal with getting to know the different qualities of mind, whether they're skillful or whether they're unskillful, and how to use the reflections to bring a sense of peace and clarity to our practice. It serves as the basis for developing even deeper insight as we move along through the recollections and the reflections. So I just offer that for this evening's reflection as a possible useful approach to understanding and reconditioning Chitta and serving as a basis for the deepening of our insight. We'll leave that for tonight's reflection.